Well, welcome to the Private Practice Elevation Podcast. Kat Love, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for agreeing to be here. It's been little while since we've caught up, as we were talking about before started recording here. Just always great to hear from you and hear about what you're doing. So
Yeah.
for those that don't know you, let's just start with who you are and what you do.
I am a website designer for psychotherapists. I've been doing it for, I think, at least 4 years. I actually should check, but it's been a while. My whole kind of reason that I'm in this is because I am a sexual abuse survivor, and I got a lot of support from therapists. Actually, still today, I have a therapist now who I love, and I'm doing some really important work with. And I just think it's so valuable, the work that therapists do.
Yeah. Well, how did you get into just working with therapists, like starting a design business and all that? What can you tell us just a little bit more about your story, like how that transformed into that?
Yeah, so I actually started doing web design for my previous business as like to promote myself. And then at some point decided that I wanted to start doing something new. And I was exploring a bunch of different ideas. Like I was even looking into making like a clothing line and stuff like that. Like I was just
Wow.
like really in this place where I was like exploring different things that I could do. And one of my ideas was to start doing web design for other people since I had all this experience doing it for myself over the years and digital marketing strategy over the years that I had done for myself. Like I could channel this into doing it for other people. And so I was lucky to meet with a friend of a friend who's a WordPress developer in San Francisco. And he gave me some really, really good advice. He told me that um, instead of being like a generalist website designer, that I could focus instead on a niche.
Yeah.
And it took me a few days. I kind of sat back and was like, who do I really want to work with? Like, who is deserving, who inspires me, who motivates me? And I thought of therapists. So, yeah, it's kind of how it all evolved.
Yeah, it's actually pretty similar to my own story where I remember before I started my business about 3 years ago going through those stages of what can I do? And I was just wasn't fulfilled at my current 9 to 5 job that I was doing. And so I entered that whole dreaming phase of like, I can do this, I can do that. Like, I think I didn't it wasn't a fashion line, but I was like, maybe I could design t-shirts and like just like
Yeah.
fun. You have all these fun ideas and then like you just got to put them on paper and then you're like, okay, scratch that, scratch that. So that's kind of what I did before landing on the same niche. Well, you have been just a wealth of knowledge in the community, especially around websites and online marketing for therapists. And anytime I see you post in the Facebook groups, I always learn from from what you say. Is you spend a lot of time on the questions that people ask, and so I just it's inspiring to me, and you're just a asset to this community for sure.
Thank
And so
you. Thank you for saying that.
yeah,
Yeah.
well, super excited to have you on. And I know what we're going to talk about today is not super glamorous as far as marketing goes, but it's extremely important, which is stock image licenses and just things that therapists need to know when using stock photos on their website. And you wrote a blog post that caught my eye, and honestly it's something that I don't know a ton about, so that's exactly why I wanted to have you on, because you've done a lot of research on this topic. So can you sort of set the stage with what are stock images and why is this something that therapists need to think about?
hmm Stock images are images that therapists and other small business owners can use when they don't have the budget they don't have a creative director and a photographer on staff.
That would be
Or,
nice.
I know, wouldn't it? But it's not really possible usually at the small business level. And so that's where stock image photography comes in. What you have are different platforms where you can, or like marketplaces essentially, where you can go and buy photography that has already been shot and is for sale. there's a whole range of prices. You can find anywhere from like subscription services that are like $12 a month for unlimited pictures, and you can find all the way up to the higher end where it's like 500, 600, 7 for just one image.
Mm.
But the thing that's in common with all of this is that you essentially go to these marketplaces, purchase or download the images that you want to use, and then you can use them in your marketing assets like your website.
And well, before we go further, I know that it's important that we say that you are not a lawyer, and nothing we talk about can be perceived as legal advice, because we are going to talk a little bit about licenses and stuff like that. So I just wanted to make that statement that anyone who is listening, this is for educational purposes only, and I'm sure we'll talk about steps that you can take to get more sound legal advice. So what's the problem with using stock photos as it pertains to mental health professionals?
Right. So, unlike other types of small businesses, mental health professionals are working in kind of a sensitive area of people's lives. It has to do with health, it has to do with mental health. And as we all know, mental health is very heavily stigmatized in society.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating and it makes me really angry. It's like something that I try
Yeah.
to work against
Hmm.
every day as being very, like I'm very open about being a sexual abuse survivor and going to therapy. But um, despite all of my efforts, I still see that there's a lot of stigma. And so
Yeah.
what happens is a lot of stock image websites, their license will not allow the use of models in uh, mental health contexts, and that's to prevent them from being defamed.
Hmm.
Defamed or defamation is basically, tarnishing somebody's character or affecting their reputation. Sometimes it's also called an offense clause, and so it's a clause that has to do with like offending the model.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of a protection for for their reputation and not to be, out there on the internet, someone with like depression or anxiety or, sexual intimacy issues or something like that.
Right.
These licenses exist to protect them from being defamed.
Yeah, that makes sense. And well, what are some of the types of restrictions that different stock image suppliers put on their photos?
Yeah, so a lot of, I would say the majority of stock providers will just have like absolutely no, never, do not use ever, no trespassing.
Wah, wah.
Yeah, so it's like basically, yeah, it's basically just a completely like not allowed, forbidden,
Hmm.
and there's no exceptions. So for these types of licenses, I usually just recommend that therapists don't use images from those stock sites that contain models that are identifiable, um, or just don't use that stock website at all, because in some cases it might just make more sense for you just to go somewhere else where they're a little
Yeah.
bit more flexible or they have a more accepting license.
Right. And so you mentioned about being like identifiable models. Is it okay to use, or is it really you have to check on their license? Is it okay to use, anonymous models if maybe their face isn't to the camera, that sort of thing?
Yeah. So when I was doing research on this, the answer is yes. Like if the model cannot be identified, then it should be okay to use. It's kind of a little bit of a gray area because I'm sure some people are like, well, I'm the only person in the world that has a, bunny rabbit tattoo on my wrist, and so like there's some things that like you would think are anonymous but might not be, but so you still want to like kind of tread lightly in that
Yeah.
direction, but it's more sure to be okay if it's stuff like hands, feet. Sometimes photographers will take really cool shots of like, people from the neck down or
Hmm.
from behind, right? So like you have these, pictures of people that are looking at a view.
Yeah.
And so stuff like that can also be perhaps used if it's like anonymous enough. And in having that anonymity, the model isn't defamed in any way, so you wouldn't be in violation of the license.
Right. And I like to, like, if you are using, I mean, I know for the sites that I've worked on, I always prefer having some sort of human element to it when you're trying to, create that connection and that empathy with your ideal client. I'm I heard this time and again, people are just so tired of seeing the stacked rocks on therapist websites. Like, what does that really represent to your ideal client? So I think, really for me, a starting point for stock photos is always like, let's see if we can really bring in that human element. And then it's kind of learning to play according to the rules if you're going to be using some of these stock sites.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, I think the human element is definitely something to um, works for a lot of therapist websites. I'm not going to say I'm totally anti stacked rocks.
Okay.
It really has to do with like the therapist, like if they're coming
Right.
from something where that symbolism in that community that they serve or
That's
that their
true. Yeah.
audience, so like, but I feel like it's really limited to like, the Zen psychotherapists or something like that,
Right.
Buddhist psychotherapy or something like that.
Yeah.
If you're not in that kind of realm, then it may not make sense.
Right.
And you might need a picture of a person.
Right. It all comes down to knowing who your ideal client is and, who you want to attract for sure. Well, so there's those sites that say, okay, it's not okay to use identifiable models related to mental health. Um, are there some that allow you to use that, but have certain restrictions that are just a little bit, tighter?
Yeah, yeah. So there are two other types of restrictions to kind of be familiar with that exist. One is a disclaimer use. And so iStock Photo is an example of this. I had reached out to their support people to kind of understand more about what the disclaimer needed to look like and where it needed to be. And they advised me that if you're going to use pictures of identifiable models from their website, one thing to do is to make sure that there's a model release on file. And I think that this is something very common for most stock photos to have is a model release. Usually, more like photojournalistic style stuff will not have
Mm-hmm.
a model release, right? So, like if somebody goes and takes a picture of a presidential speech, they're not going to get a model release from the president,
Right.
right? So, but
Yeah.
most cases, therapists don't have to worry about that. They're not going to be using that type of photography on their
Yeah.
website. So, the type of photos that most therapists would use, there's likely a model release, but something to also be aware of. Check for a model release, and then as long as there's a model release, they said to put a disclaimer on the same page where the photo might appear. And so for my therapist websites, what I do is I put a disclaimer into the footer of every, it's all, and the footer is included on every page persistently. And so
Mm-hmm.
that kind of takes care of the entire website.
Yeah.
Uh, and you could also repeat the disclaimer within like a privacy policy or a terms of service or something like that, where it makes sense to do so.
That's great. That's really good to know. I like that you can just have it sort of relegated to that one spot rather than messing up the design a little bit and kind of taking I'm all about clean design and like minimal and let's keep everything as clean as possible, but that kind of takes care of you of the release there. And do you have any tips on what should that disclaimer say?
Yeah, so I usually write something like, besides images of myself, all photos on this site are stock models, are posed by stock models. And so that kind of just makes it clear, because obviously you want to exclude your own picture
Yeah.
just in case somebody, I mean, for the most part, nobody's reading the fine print. But if they're curious about it, or if they are digging into like, looking at your footer, looking at your terms, it's good to be clear that, your own picture is actually authentically you, and then the
Mm-hmm.
other pictures may be stock models. And that also kind of, I think it's also helpful, like if you think about it, it's kind of also helpful for making it clear that you're not posting pictures of clients. Like, I don't know that there would be anyone who would think that they're clients, but if you're posting
Yeah.
stuff that looks like it's taking place in a therapy room, some clients might be even getting nervous of like, oh no, is this like, am I going to be on camera when I go in? I don't
Yeah.
know. I don't know. It depends on your audience again of like
Yeah.
who you're serving and what kind of what they might have in their mind about what therapy is like.
Right. And just making sure that you're being careful of those those sensitivities as well. That makes sense. And I always encourage people to, as much anxiety as you can relieve on your for your website visitor before they become your client, like the better. So that's just one small thing. You never know. People could think that, like, oh, am I going to have to be on camera during a session? People are going to know I'm visiting this therapist. Yeah, that makes
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, I'm sorry, just to backtrack, you mentioned that there are two other types of releases or licenses. So it was the disclaimer, and what's the other one?
Yeah, so there's also a second one, as I said, where it's not like absolutely never do not use photos of models. Instead, it's something called a sensitive use license. The website that I've seen this on is Stocksy, which is a very popular and very high quality stock photo website. And I think it's I think it's like $400 though. So it's like extremely expensive,
Mm.
but that said, if you find an image on that website and you're just in love with it, you can purchase it, and with a sensitive use license, they release the ability for you to use that in a sensitive use context like mental health.
And is that 400 for every image that
Yeah,
you
it's
when
per
you?
image.
Wow, yeah, that could get expensive.
Yeah, but I mean, I actually have had one therapist that wanted to just like fell in love with this image because
Yeah.
I think the other struggle with stock images is that it's hard to find diversity. And so places like Stocksy were really, I mean, it's getting a little bit better now. Like I feel like over the last year, even I've seen an improvement
Yeah.
in diversity on stock websites. But prior to like in the olden days, when I was using when I was helping a lot with therapists finding images, it was very, very challenging to find diversity. And so Stocksy was one of the first to kind of have more diversity than you could find elsewhere.
Hmm.
And so a therapist just really fell in love with an image and was like, I don't care if it's 400, I'm going to pay it.
That's great.
Yeah. And
Yep.
it's one of the central, but the great thing is now they have this asset that they can use throughout all their marketing assets. And it just really resonates with who they're trying to serve and who they're trying to attract. And so it works, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. You know, are there certain sites that you just mentioned Stocksy? Are there other ones that you really just highly recommend, and their licenses work really well for therapists?
Yeah, so my main recommendation is usually iStock Photo. They have a really large library. They have the disclaimer use allowed.
Hmm.
Another one that's it's a smaller library, but it's also still pretty good. It's called Death to the Stock Photo. And this, they don't have any disclaimers or anything in their license. And I actually also tweeted them and I've talked to the CEO and stuff, and they're okay with mental health use.
Hmm.
As far as I know, something else I'll say here is like, please follow up with everything.
Yeah.
Make sure you read the licenses yourself. I recommend iStock Photo with disclaimer use, but if they ever change their license, might not know about it, or they might do so after we publish this podcast. And so,
Right.
um, yeah. So always take what I say as like, maybe this will work, and then go research it for
Right.
yourself.
Yeah, and I know in that original blog post you also mentioned that sometimes the support people from those stock photo sites aren't even totally aware of the licenses. Didn't you
hmm
ran into something like that where there was a discrepancy there?
Yeah. Yeah, so I actually in my research I went and I was trying to like think of all the like stock websites that like the major ones that most people use and the ones that are appropriately priced for, a solo or small business like a therapist practice. And so I was doing a lot of research. I was reaching out to all these support desks, and I found that some of the replies that I got were not informed as to the anti-defamation clause that was in their own license, right? And so my guess
Uh,
is that it's like a customer support person that's probably
yeah.
not dealing with legal issues, and so they just kind of say like, "Oh no, it's fine," like, or maybe it's like a salesperson at that point where they're just like trying to sell their stuff without really
Right.
understanding completely. So I think the other thing that I recommend beyond reading the license for yourself is to uh, talk with a attorney. Like there are actually like intellectual rights attorneys. I think
Yeah.
they're in that kind of space, intellectual property rights or image licensing, intellectual property, stuff like that. Those attorneys and maybe someone who has a little bit of knowledge also of like healthcare. Um, yeah, they can guide you further, or just, make sure you always read at least yourself.
Yeah, so you have to do lesson here is do your homework, and I think it would be worth it to, yeah, read it yourself and also reach out to their customer support, see what matches up. But yeah, probably the best thing you can do is get that attorney, and I believe somebody who does that can also help with like privacy policies and terms and conditions, for websites as well, which I know I just actually ran into this last week. I know you can just generate a free privacy policy, but again, if you really want to be protected with all this stuff, reach out for some professional help for sure.
Yeah, and it really does depend on your risk tolerance too. Like
Yeah.
some therapists are very just like, oh well, it'll be fine. And other ones get really high anxiety when they
Yeah.
realize that there might be, a potential lawsuit down the road if
Right.
they're not covering certain things. So depends on where you are and how you feel. If you feel in your heart that this is something that's really important to you to have settled, then it might be worth an investment into speaking with an attorney that can do maybe all of those things at once. They can do your privacy policy,
Yeah.
terms of service, any other legal kind of documents. Maybe you look over your paperwork. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into this. And I think the image licenses is one extra thing you can add in.
Yeah, and you also mentioned too in the blog post having some sort of like liability insurance as well.
Oh yeah, so that's also super important. Um, there was a case of a mutual friend of ours that actually got into a lawsuit over an image that was stolen. Well, they didn't realize it was stolen,
Yeah.
but it was like kind of, I think it was like stolen from a photographer and then planted onto like a free
Free.
resource site or
Yeah.
something like that. And so they got caught up in this, and I think the lawsuit was like 20, it settled for 20K.
Oh goodness.
But their malpractice insurance covered it because the malpractice insurance had I don't know exactly what it's called, I guess, but there's a certain area of malpractice insurance that can cover your like business assets, like marketing and in case you infringe on somebody's copyright and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So like copyright infringement protection would be
Yeah.
what I would kind of put into the search box for
Yeah.
the researching the insurance options. So if you already have malpractice insurance, maybe reach out to whoever your provider is and see if they offer like copyright infringement stuff or like explain, the possibility of something like that happening to them and see if they have something already included in your plan. And if
Yeah.
not, maybe it's like an upgrade or something like that. That would be also super, I mean, it could be like the difference of like $10 a year or something like that,
Yeah. It's
so
super
it's
affordable.
worth it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
for sure. Oh, it's scary stuff. What do you on that topic of free stock photo sites? What are your do you recommend those sites? What are some other things that people need to know about those sites? Because I know I get asked that a lot. Like, which sites are good for free stock photos?
Yeah, so I think because of that case of our mutual friend having that lawsuit against them, after that I've been a lot more hesitant to recommend free photo sites just because of the possibility that a premium stock photo could always be taken from a premium site and then posted onto a free site, and so you wouldn't even know that it was stolen. Do you know what I
Right.
mean?
Yeah.
So, I mean, like my personal risk tolerance is not good with that.
Yeah.
So, like I've stopped using free um, free stock photos for my own business, and I don't really ever recommend it anymore. Also because stock photos are so affordable. So like if you're not gonna, like for instance, the use case that most therapists have for needing stock photos like on a very regular basis is for content. So that could
Hmm.
be social media content, it could be blog content, it could be like stills that you're inserting into video content. So if you're a content creator as well as a therapist and you're doing that for your marketing, you're probably going to need some type of source for images. A lot
Yeah.
of people do turn to free images, but as long as you're not using pictures of people's face every single time, you can get a subscription service that's, $15 a month for unlimited pictures, right? And then you'll have access to an entire library and keep your receipts.
Yeah.
Keep, take a couple screenshots here and there of what the license are like, and you're good to go and you're covered. And so you just kind of take that liability of possibly by mistake using somebody's copyrighted image, you reduce that to zero, just for like, $10 a month or something like that. So personally, that's kind of where I stand. I'm not like, never use free images, but you really want to understand what the risks are so that you're going into it with an awareness of what risk you're even taking, right?
Right, absolutely. And with empathy sites, is that something that you all handle for your clients, the stock photos?
So we are moving into a new era of image services.
Cool.
And I'm getting a subscription with Death to the Stock Photo, and we're going to be partnering with them to provide images to therapists for their website designs.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it's like all all taken care of.
Yeah. So, that's beautiful. Yeah. Awesome. Well, what are just to wrap up this conversation, what are some alternatives that people can do instead of, worrying about all these licenses and insurance and all that stuff? Do you have any recommendations?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think one thing that I have seen a handful of therapists do is actually hire professional photographers to take their photos for their website. In some cases, it can be as easy as just having like a portrait session and then asking the photographer to take more pictures. So have them take pictures of like your desk and take pictures of your books and take picture of, your shelf with a little plant on it. And these are the kind of images that you could use just throughout your branding and throughout your website. And it's all automatically consistent because it's based on your space and what you're doing and what you set up. And it's like literally taking the space that you've created in real life and putting that on the internet. And so I feel like that's a really good option. And I've seen a lot of therapists do that with success. The other way to take that even a step further is to like ask your friends, maybe people that look similar to your ideal client, and have them pose in images. Like maybe in your office, maybe they'll be like sitting on the couch talking with you, or they'll be like right outside your office, like walking along the pathway or something, right? So if you work with a really good and talented photographer, they'll be able to help brainstorm on ideas and how to use, your models in different ways, and just have those models sign, a really simple model release. You can find a bunch of examples of model releases online. Have them sign the release, and you are totally free and clear to use those images in mental health, and then again, it's like more consistent that way. So yeah. Oh, and a third idea that I did not mention in the article, so it's a bonus idea. I've also had a therapist that I know reach out to a photographer who was local to them and ask to use their photos. And they were more doing like landscapes and like still shots of like the architecture in the town, because it was like a really cute little town. And so it was like stuff that their clients would recognize from around town. And I thought that was really a creative idea too. So like there might be, if you're from a small town or even from a big town, if you know of any photographers that are working in your area and doing cool stuff, send them an email and say, hey, I have this website that I want to put together for promoting my mental health services. Could I use photos that you shoot? So like, there's a lot of creative solutions to this as well.
Yeah. And I found too, all the photographers that I know, they're super helpful, and they obviously love referrals. So, if you've got a network of other therapists and colleagues, like you could always recommend. So this actually happened recently to myself. I just happened to get a couple clients locally building their websites. Like, oh, do you know any photographers? Like, actually, I do know somebody. And so we're actually working, my wife and I, to schedule some time with this photographer for our own businesses. And she's giving us, deals and stuff because we recommended people to her, and I'm sure we will in the future. So people they're just great, and usually able to work with you and your budget, and even design a package that's going to work for your budget and time as well.
Totally. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, are there any other tips you have around stock image usage while we wrap this up?
Um,
We covered a
I
lot.
think yeah, I think we were pretty comprehensive. Yeah, no, that's pretty much it. I think take deep breaths. Don't get overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and yeah, it's good.
Awesome. Well, we'll link up the original blog post that you wrote that has a really handy chart in there that just shows the different uh, photo websites and their different licenses and stuff. But thank you so much, Kat, for your time. Before you go, I always like to ask everybody, what is a book that you have read recently that has impacted you?
Ooh, oh my gosh.
I always get that
Well,
response. Ooh,
yeah.
hard to choose.
Well, no, I actually, yeah, it's hard to choose. But I mean, I'm sure most therapists have already read this book, but I feel like the book that's impacted me the most in my personal life is The Body Keeps the Score by
Mm,
Bessel van der Kolk. So that was like really life changing for me on a personal level. And I
mm,
want to add in a professional one as well.
yeah.
I also reread Profit First
Hmm.
by Mike Michalowicz.
Yeah.
And then I saw him speak in Chicago, which was really fun
Oh,
to
cool.
follow that up.
Yeah.
But yeah, Profit First is like one of the better business concept books that that's changed the way that I look at my
Yes.
business life
Yes. Same here.
recently.
I didn't reread it, but I actually just brushed up, revisited, all of that method, and it's like, oh yeah, there's things that I can change and continue to work on this. So very cool. Well, thank you so much, Kat, for your time. Where can people find you online if they want to learn more about you?
Yeah, so my website design service for therapists is at empathysites.com, and my personal brand is at catlove.com. So you can find me there.
Great. Thanks so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.